Good afternoon, and welcome back to the final episode of my EMU review trilogy. In this video we'll be covering the top 10, i.e. the best EMUs in the country, in my humble opinion of course. So, now I'm using the same points-based system as I have used for the previous videos, and the remaining trains are pretty good if you ask me. Well, obviously they're in my top 10, but that's not the point. I've tried to remove a lot of the biases I may have to particular trains, by reducing them down to certain components that make up a good vehicle. Right, you're all probably a little bored of this image, so I'll move on. In 10th place we have the Class 801, with 57 points. Now I know what you're thinking, but please listen to me. The Class 801 is actually quite a good train, at least on the East Coast Main Line. They look stunning in that LNER livery, and they sound quite good as well. Furthermore, they're reliable, and their acceleration is nothing short of phenomenal considering the 140 mph top speed. This has really provided a step up for East Coast Mainline passengers over the Class 91s and HSTs, so they do get an approval from me. The interiors do let them down slightly though. First class is a little underwhelming, and the seats are hardly amazing in either standard or first. However, it is far better than GWR's similar Class 800s. On the whole, these are fantastic trains and I think very underrated. 9th place goes to the Class 379, and I don't think it would be shocking to say that they're my favourite Electrostars by a long shot. The interiors are brilliant, but more or less everything else is the same as the Class 387, except for the fact that they can only run on AC power. But being dual voltage isn't necessary for every train. The 379 doesn't need it. I'm really disappointed that these trains didn't get more use. I think this is what the 387 should have been, and when combined with the dual voltage counterpart, I think these would have made a fantastic mid-distance express train for the southeast, a true successor to the 442. In 8th place we have the Class 373, the original Eurostar. They're some of my personal favourites, and the sounds are exceptional. The passenger comfort is also great. Following their recent refurbishment, they've got a very light and airy feel that you would not expect to find on an old train. Yet they somehow pulled it off perfectly, better than most recent trains. Now, the Class 373 is an extremely niche product, being designed almost purely for Channel Tunnel services, which required use of third rail DC power on the British side of the tunnel, as HS1 hadn't yet been constructed when they entered service. When this is combined with the many different voltages used on the continent, the Eurostars feel, well, a little bit cluttered. They are also required to fit into the British loading gauge, which makes them look oddly small for high-speed trains. They also don't look the best, but they're hardly the ugliest in the world. Now that may have sounded rather harsh, but ultimately these are brilliant trains, which is evidenced by their high position. Also with 57 points, that's 4 in a row, is the Class 450 in 7th place. They're Desiros, and I really do like them. The greatest strength of these is that they tick all the boxes. They're fantastic at everything, really, and they come with great reliability too. The one downside is the fact that they have 2+3 seating, but given the very wide profile of the Desiros, and the fact that all the interiors they've worn are actually quite good, it's not the end of the world. The Class 350, meanwhile, gets 6th place, and that's basically an AC version of the 450, so it's understandable they're quite close. What puts the 350 above the 450 is the fact that it has 2+2 seating, at least in most subclasses. This is great, I don't really need to explain much more. 5th place is the Class 803, a very close relative to the 801. Despite being for Lumo, their budget operator, these have got to be some of the best IETs to have entered service. This is almost entirely down to the seats. Oh, and those seats have to be some of the best in any modern design. They're just great, and it's amazing to see an IET with something that isn't a Faenza Sophia. The seating layout isn't so good though, with only a few tables per coach, which is why its passenger comfort is only half a point higher than the 801, which I think gets the balance more or less exactly right. When coupled with the brilliant performance of the IETs, I think the Class 803 is a very good fit for the East Coast budget operations that Lumo uses them on. In 4th place is the Class 390, a really fantastic train. They're rather special in the fact that they tilt, and operate the Premier Express services along the West Coast Main Line. Originally being introduced by Virgin Trains, they're now operated by the, questionable Avanti. Whilst they're not quite as striking as in their Virgin heyday, I still think the Pendolinos look good in their Avanti livery. and the actual design itself is very aesthetically pleasing. The rounded edges are rather nice to look at, and I do love the way the doors work. Internally speaking, the trains, both unrefurbished and refurbished, have a good ambience, though the unrefurbished sets are starting to feel a little tired. That said, the older seats are brilliant. They've got to be the most comfortable on the network in both standard and first class. And whilst the refurbished seats aren't quite as good, they're not bad by any stretch of the imagination. The lost marks are for the windows. They're tiny, and spaced so far apart it's very difficult to find a seat that you can actually get a view out of. That said, the Pendolinos are such fantastic trains to travel on, because of their ride quality. They glide along the tracks so beautifully, it's just very enjoyable. Their tilting functionality is also brilliant for the West Coast Main Line. It's just a shame they can't run at 140 miles an hour. Into the top 3 and we have the Class 397, with 60 points. Curiously, these are the only EMUs in Britain to have ever been built with a 125 mile an hour design speed, despite it being such a common max operating speed. So, where do we begin? First of all, they look beautiful. These have got to be some of the best looking trains in the UK if you ask me. Their acceleration is great and they're extremely reliable. And their ride quality is actually quite good for a CAF train. But the best thing about the 397s is their interiors. For a modern train, they're exceptional. Indeed, if they were an older train, they'd be brilliant too. The seat comfort isn't the best, it's a phone to severe, but the ambience is perfect. It feels like a lounge, and there are loads of tables leading to brilliant window alignment. There's also a healthy ration of bike space, and first class is a real step up from standard. These trains are living proof that it can still be done. The Class 397 is about as perfect as you can get when it comes to a regional express train. I just wish there was more electrification so they could be rolled out across the country on a wider basis. Second place goes to the Class 374, some proper high-speed trains. They have a top speed of 200 miles an hour, and accelerate extraordinarily well considering that. Oh, and whilst they're accelerating to said top speed, well, they sound amazing. There is more or less nothing you could ask for when it comes to performance. The passenger comfort is good. Not quite as good as a Class 373, but still very enjoyable nonetheless. Also, the buffet looks like it's straight out of the USS Enterprise, so it's bumped up by one place. Personally speaking, I like the way they look as well, though I understand that that's not a universal opinion. I mean, seeing these, I just feel a bit disappointed. How can we make trains like this and then not operate them domestically? They're just so brilliant, and yet we're refusing to operate them where they're really needed. Look, I know there's loading gauge restrictions and everything, but is it really beyond the wit of man to make a comfortable train that fits inside the British loading gauge? No, it's been done time and time again before, so why are we stuck with nonsense like this? Alright, I know it's supposed to be a top 10 video, so I should be talking about positive stuff. Let's move on to first place then, and that accolade goes to the Class 444. I must say I rather like the slim Desiro style with doors at the end of the coaches. It looks very smart. They sound as great as any other and accelerate quite well considering their third rail DC. Oh yes, did I mention that? They're third rail DC. They're an actually good long distance train that's third rail DC. It's amazing. They're brilliant trains to ride on, thanks to their superior passenger comfort. The only thing that lets them down is the first class. I mean, 2+2, come on SWR, what were you thinking ripping out this? They ride very well as well, but I think their best accolade is the fact that they just work. They're great mid-distance, mid-priority express trains, and I think a lot of train manufacturers could learn from the 444. Well, that's been my thoughts on what I believe to be the 10 best electric multiple units in Great Britain. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, feel free to join my Discord server, but you don't have to. I'll see you next time, which won't be a ranking video, I am sick to death of them, and goodbye until then.